Well, hello, my name is Mark Brown and I want to welcome you to this presentation. The presentation is something that's very personal. This is something that comes from both my heart as well as obviously my research and what I've discovered, but this is something very personal. If you are watching this and you are someone who has experienced grief, then this, I hope and pray, is something that helps you as it is helping me. If you know someone who is struggling with grief, and it doesn't have to be the grief of the loss of a child as it is for me, it could be the grief that you have at the loss of a family member, a parent, a brother, or it could be a loss of a dear friend, or even the loss that comes with losing a job, whatever it is. This is about the topic of grief and how we deal with it in everyday life. So if you are someone who've experienced it, you're welcome. If you're someone who knows someone who's going through grief, then I hope this helps you. I hope this gives you some tools to help them, and maybe you can encourage them to watch this. I am live streaming right now, but I'm also recording it. And I'm going to make it available later on YouTube or on Facebook, but I will give you details about it. So my story, if you haven't heard, my story is that about 5.5 or so months ago, I lost my son Christian. I lost our son Judah, who's there. He was 3. That is quite a recent photo before he passed. And he drowned in a very tragic accident. And just 5.5 months ago. And in that process since then, obviously we experienced extreme stress, trauma, and grief. And so as I share this, I want to share with you what I've discovered, and I am continuing to learn, but I want to offer to you, if you are grieving or know someone who is grieving, what I have learned. Well, the first thing to say, and most importantly, is that everyone grieves differently. The way I grieve and the way my wife is grieving, there is so much similarity, but she grieves very differently to me. She is a writer, and she has written the most extraordinary things as she explores and expresses her grief. And for me, one of the ways that I deal with grief is exactly this. Is producing content, more, not so much writing, but presenting and understanding. But each of us, including you, we all grieve differently. And the first thing I want to say, and the most important thing at the outset, is that don't let anyone dictate to you how long you grieve for, or how you grieve, because it is unique and particular to you. If it's important for you in your grief to go to the grave, or to hold the ashes, or to watch videos, or to create a song, or to spend a weekend looking through photos, then do that. Don't allow anyone to dictate and tell you what is right and what is wrong. Grief is intensely personal. And it can take as long as it needs to take. Don't ever let anyone say, at this point you should be getting on with your life. Your father died a year ago. Your father died 6 months ago, or whatever it is. That's just simply unhelpful. You know, professionals, scientists, counselors, psychologists, as I've done my research, talk about the grief, intense grief, significant grief can last 2 to 3 years. The first year is tough. The second year is particularly tough. And for some, it lasts even longer. What I will say, and this is one of the things I want to share and provide to you, and hopefully it is supports in you, is that what we need to do, those of us who are grieving and those who are supporting those who are grieving, is to be careful that it doesn't become a long-term medical issue. It's not that we don't grieve, but that we grieve well and we grieve in a healthy way. Because actually research shows that if the grief can lead to all sorts of significant issues, not just substance abuse, hiding from the grief and the pain and the trauma through alcohol misuse or drug misuse, but also there are links to suicide. There are links to physiological issues, heart issues, as the extreme stress leading to all sorts of problems and ailments. So it's important that we grieve, but we grieve in a healthy way, that we don't affect ourselves long term and really, really detrimentally affect. So that's what I want to talk about. So those of experiencing grief, let me tell you, this is some of what it's like to be grieving. For some, you feel like you're going crazy. You have difficulty concentrating. You feel sad or depressed often, way more than you ever have. And it's not a conscious thing. You don't wake up and go, this person, my son Judah, is not with me, and then you get down. It's not that transactional. It's just an overwhelming, constant sense of sadness that manifests and builds into depression. You can be irritable or angry. You can feel frustrated or misunderstood. Why won't those around me understand the pain that I'm going through? Actually, they probably do. They just don't know how to express it. And maybe in a future video, I may talk about how do you respond to people who are grieving, who are really grieving or in extreme stress. But I won't talk about that today. Other experiences of grief, anxiety, nervousness, or fearfulness. You know, one of the things that happened when we lost Judah was the bubble, what I call the illusion of safety disappeared. This sense that my children were safe, that somehow they were going to be okay. I'm an eternal optimist, and that was severely damaged. That sense of fearfulness enters your world because, well, if this can happen once, can it happen again? So the grief response is fear. For some, they feel like they want to escape. They feel guilt or remorse, and this is particularly the case if you have lost a child. You are responsible for that child. And I can tell you, I haven't met one parent who's lost a child who in some way does not feel guilt. That is certainly the experience of Christy and I. It is very common to feel like I failed. Well, the truth is you didn't. I didn't fail. My wife did not fail. It was a tragic accident, but that guilt remains. You feel numb. You lack energy and motivation. There's this constant sense that something isn't right. And you're constantly reminded. You see it all over the place. You see people who remind you of the deceased, the person who's gone. If you have trauma, you remember and have flashbacks and are reminded. You hear an ambulance and you're transported back into what happened. These are all very real, invisible, difficult challenges that those that grieve deal with. And it's incredibly tough to be present, to do everyday life, to get up, go to work, be present for your family, head to church, manage the household. When all of this is happening, because the reality is that a huge amount of your psychological resources are taken with the grief process. Conscious or not, it draws from your reservoir and affects the way you conduct life. And I tell you, It happens and can happen. Moments of grief. It's like in Rotorua in New Zealand, there are hot mud geysers, and the ground looks normal from a distance, and then suddenly a squirt of mud from the tumult just underneath the surface. The pressure builds and the mud flies up into the air. It's impressive to watch. Sometimes it's obvious because there's a pit of mud bubbling away, and other times you can't tell. It just looks like normal ground, but it just wells up in the pressure, and that's what grief is like. There are moments when it's obvious that the grief will be present. An anniversary. That can be the birthday. That can be the day of when they died. And there are moments also when you don't expect it. I was at a restaurant recently with a friend, and they were being very thoughtful and caring, and they just asked how I was. And then they didn't even ask, how are you coping with your grief? And without warning, I started crying. And that geyser of mud, that emotional mud, burst through the surface. And I remember distinctly sitting in that restaurant, surrounded in families, being very self-conscious, looking at something, I think it was a sign, trying to calm the emotion down so I could have a conversation. Now, that's not to say I shouldn't express. I'm just sharing a story of how we can't predict when it's going to break, when the emotions are going to come forward. And be gentle on yourself. Be upfront with those around you. What I said to my friend is that happens. That isn't happening all the time. I don't want to give the impression that every 20 minutes I'm crying, but there are moments when the emotion overwhelms me, when I have a memory, or I imagine my son Judah being in that restaurant, and how can I but be affected by that? And that's natural and normal and absolutely okay. And if that friend can't handle that emotion, then maybe you shouldn't be with them. And that's okay too. So it's going to happen. It's not linear. There is no set stages, which is why you will not hear me talking about the very famous model of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I'm not going to talk about that because that doesn't work for me. And I don't think it's helpful, but we shouldn't invest too much in it. Because grief is like waves to me. There are moments where the sea is rough and stormy, and then suddenly the waves pick up and they smash, the emotions smash across me. And I cannot but struggle for breath. I cannot but try and keep my head above the water, and sometimes feel like I'm drawn down and I'm fighting. To me, that is grief. It is not a succinct, clear process. It is more a tumult, a maelstrom of emotions that I'm trying to navigate in everyday life. So here's what I say. I don't think my goal is not for me to get to a place where grief doesn't affect me. That is not my goal. My goal is to not move on and forget Judah. My goal is to honor and respect the memory of Judah, to never forget him, but to not let the grief stop what God has in store for me. So it's that balance of grieving, of making sure that I'm honest and authentic and I grieve, but not letting it wreck me, and at the same time not moving on. I know I will be on my deathbed many years from now, and I will still have emotion and look forward to being with Judah. And that won't leave me, and that's okay. So we grieve because we love. The more we love, the more we grieve. And that's why when you have someone that you really intensely love, when you lose them, you intensely grieve. Take the time. Don't rush it. Don't let anyone downplay your grief, ever. Validate it. It is real. Just as your love is real. So what effects does grief have on us? Well, I discovered something called grief brain. It is a real thing. I didn't make that up. And grief brain is struggling with concentration. It's messing up. It's, I was driving the other day and I clipped the curb. Nothing serious, no accident. I just caught the curb. And my first thought was, how? Like I've never done that. How did that happen? And then it's sense of like, whoa, why did that happen? That's grief brain. It's losing something, losing a device. The number of times I can't find my iPhone has increased dramatically. It's losing concentration, forgetting what you were talking about, midstream. All of these things are grief brain, absent-mindedness and fog. But this is recognized. And what I want to do is I want to share with you why it happens and how we can counter it. And these are practical ways of dealing with grief. But let me start by saying there has been some research done into this. Recently, finance professors studied 75,000. They tracked 75,000 Danish companies in the 2 years before and after the CEO had experienced family death. And this is really, really amazing. Listen to this. The financial performance of the company declined 20% after the loss of a child, 15% after the death of a spouse, and almost 10% after the demise of any other family member. I don't want to read too much into that, but suffice to say there is clear evidence that we are affected when we grieve. It's easy to become disorganized, distracted, distraught, distressed, and disoriented. So what actually is happening? What happens is that, first thing is, neurologically, our resources are, we have a certain amount of resources to deal with life every day. And that is everything from organizing what you're going to wear, what you're going to do throughout the day, to making sure that you concentrate at the right times to get stuff done, to driving your car, taking a phone call. We have a certain set of resources to do that. A number of neurons. We are finite. We don't have infinite. And what happens is, the first thing that happens is when you grieve, a lot of those resources are taken up with the grief, the thinking. And it's kind of like the cache, right? Behind any program on your phone or computer, there's stuff running in the background, right? It's called the cache. And it's the same way. We may not be conscious that our thinking and our resources is being taken on grief, but it sure is. And that limits and reduces the number of resources available, therefore, to focus on grief. The second thing that happens is that we start to lose neurons, hippocampal neurons. Now, up until about 1965, the science community thought that neurons could not be replaced. That once you lost them for good. And obviously, the number of neurons you lose, the harder it is to concentrate, the harder it is to think, to remember stuff. And the hippocampus is an important part of our brain. If we start to lose neurons, then that will affect our function And that contributes also to grief brain. But it's not grief, it's extreme stress that does that. And grief, of course, and trauma is part of that. So how then, if science is telling us that we can rejuvenate and create new neurons, how do you do that? Well, the first thing is, this is a technical term for creating new neurons, is neurogenesis. The creation, and science is showing, and this is really cutting edge, that we can create new hippocampal neurons, which helps reduce depression, it helps with our concentration, and I believe helps with our grief. So, how do we do it? Well, the first thing is the things that are identified that promote neurogenesis, the creation of new neurons to help reduce stress and depression and increase concentration, is mental activity. Mental activity, that is anything from reading to pushing through and concentrating even when the fog is there, it's just pushing through, to even playing kind of puzzle games on your phone or challenging yourself with an interesting conversation. Physical activity is another neurogenetic or neurogenesis activity. Now, physical activity is incredibly important in the grief process, in helping us with our grief. And this is something that I have really worked hard on. Right now, my wife Christy is out on a run, and later today I plan to do a 45-minute run. And I commit to doing physical activity and being disciplined in that. And if that's not something that's part of your week, then I encourage you to consider that. If you have health issues, speak to your doctor. Make sure you do it in a way that doesn't hurt you in other ways. But certainly start doing some exercise. And they talk about at least half an hour a day. Do something. Again, check with your doctor to make sure that's okay for you. Positive social contact. Being in social environments, but in a positive way. If it's conflict, high conflict and difficult, then that's not going to help reduce stress. It's not going to promote neurogenesis. You need to find positive people who make you feel good. Conversations that are exciting and interesting. And this leads to a really important point. Don't isolate yourself. Don't allow yourself to become a hermit. The research is clear. This is a massive, massive area of research. And though I only spend maybe a minute on it, it's actually really significant. We are humans created to be in community. God created us to be in community. And the negative psychological effects of isolation, of being alone, are really, really significant. We need to be touched. We need physical touch. So we need to have that. So my encouragement to you is, if you are someone who tends to hide, if you see that as a solution, then be aware that's not healthy in the long run. Go to church. Catch up with friends and family. Get out of the house. Have a stimulating and interesting life. What are the things, if you were to write down a list, this is what I would find interesting and stimulating. These are the things that would engage me. What would that list look like? And do them. Be stimulated. Look for new experiences. If you went north for the last year, go south. Visit new towns. Try new hobbies. And it doesn't have to be that you spend a lot of money. There are extraordinarily wonderful things that you can do that are free. And here's something that instinctively Christy and I have been doing, and it's to learn a new thing. This is actually, the research is very clear. Keep learning. And I don't mean like read a book, but actually take on the discipline and challenge of learning a whole new thing. So I have recently been watching videos that are teaching me about areas I have very little information and knowledge in. Creating, new pathways, neural pathways, opening up new opportunities and therefore promoting neurogenesis. So what is it that you can learn, not that builds on your professional where you are now, but something completely different? Learn something new. Do you have to enroll in the course? Maybe. But there's tons of free stuff out there. TED.com, YouTube. I mean, there are just Vimeo. There are tons of Lynda.com. There's a cost to that, but you can sign up 3 months for free. Lynda.com. There are tons of wonderful resources out there. Maybe you want to learn more about the Bible. Maybe you want to learn more about your church. Maybe you want to take on a new language. Oh boy, new languages. What an extraordinary way of promoting neurogenesis, opening up new areas. I want to say the last tip is really genuinely be gentle on yourself. All of what I'm sharing is not, another strap to whack yourself with, another thing to kind of put a burden on your back. These are meant to be positive. They're meant to help you. And let me say, I teach you, I share with you, I make this presentation as someone who is listening to this as well. Like I am doing this stuff. I know I need to promote neurogenesis. I am having grief brain. I am having depression. I am having concentration issues. This is happening all the time. I see tiny mistakes in my writing and I read it 10 minutes later and go, I proofread that 3 times. I need to be gentle on myself and say, Mark, you're grieving. It's okay. You're going to make mistakes. And be upfront with your family and friends about that. You know what? I'm going to mess up. And equally, if you are caring for someone who's grieving, or you have, you're involved in pastoral care or support of people who are grieving, tell them that. You know what? It's okay if you struggle with concentration. It does not mean you're crazy. It does not mean this is the early onset of dementia or you're going to have dementia. It just simply means you've got a lot on your plate. And that's okay. I'm here for you. I want to say that if anxiety or depression becomes a significant issue, then you do need to seek help. And that's what I'm doing. I'm noticing that the depression is starting to grow, so I have arranged to see a counselor. Let me finish by saying that it's okay to get angry at God. We talk about being authentic and open. It's okay to have questions of God. It's okay to talk to God about your pain and your grief. God understands. God created you and God is intimately aware of the pain and struggle that you have. And I want to read from the Beatitudes to finish. Now this is an extraordinary moment in Jesus' teaching. There are crowds gathered, and Jesus responds to the crowds. He goes forth, and he stands before them on a mountain. The disciples are there, the people who are closest to him, who have this responsibility to take on his legacy, to grow his legacy. And you have this sense like something special is going to happen. This is almost the moment where of all the teaching, this is where he begins to sharpen and distill. And this is what he says. This is Matthew 5, verse 3 on. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. And blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. There's a lot there. And rather than go line by line and draw it out, what I want to say is read this and understand that God gets your grief. Not just understanding, but he wants you to know that you are blessed. That through your pain, through your grief, God has his arms open and wants to embrace you and be present with you. For those who mourn, blessed are they will be comforted. Amen. Please leave your comments and questions below. I welcome your comments and questions. And I will do other similar live stream and similar videos. And if there's any particular topics, then leave that. But certainly one that I want to do is to talk about what it means to be a supporter of someone who's struggling in grief and to be present with them. And the last thing I want to do is to honor those who are gone. To honor my son, and for you, the person that you are grieving, the person that you have lost. They are with us still, if not physically. May we never forget them, and may we remember them always. And we praise God for them and their impact in our lives. God bless.